Welcome back to Kanga TV, the home of North Melbourne fans. My name's Marnie Cohen and it's time to dive deep into the commentary surrounding North Melbourne's 2024 trade period. This is part 2 of a 3-part series taking a deeper look into North Melbourne's trade period. The trade period ended on Wednesday and the first video of this series was me just sort of giving my initial thoughts and feelings on what we did, what we didn't do, and just more of a holistic point of view immediately after the trade period ended. Now, it's been a few days. I've had time to kind of sit and reflect on it a little bit more, and I've gathered some thoughts both internally and externally. And I think in today's video, we're just going to have a look into how the club has responded to what we were able to do, how the media has responded to what we were able to do, and just unpack a few bits and pieces a little bit further. Let's start with the club. I think that's probably the best place to start. I feel like Brady Rawlings was under a lot of pressure from fans in particular to really nail this trade period. In the weeks leading up to the trade period, we've been really vocal in talking about how we want to bring some experience to the club. We want to bring successful experience to the club and some real quality leaders as well. We have pinpointed Darling and Luke Parker as sort of our two main targets, and those were the only names that had really floated around in the weeks leading into the trade period. And we knew what we needed to do, and I think fans really expected the club to deliver. I think we understand the potential, we understand the talent that we've got in our youth, and now we just need a balancer, and we kind of needed a few more experienced heads to be able to show the young players what it takes to really make it and be successful at the top level as we look to sort of rise up the ladder. Let's take a quick look at what Brady Rawlings had to say about our 2024 trade period.
Yeah, well, I hope our fans are really excited. We certainly are. We've come to this trade period wanting to add some maturity to our list, and tonight we feel like we've been able to do that. Clearly we've got Jack Darling in the trade period earlier, but to add another experienced player in Luke, and we know what talent Luke is and the experience he brings, but to then go with Caleb again today, a 28-year-old that's got a lot of great accolades behind him. He's an All-Australian, he's best and fairest winner. So we're really excited to bring those three in.
I would say Brady's sentiment is probably shared by majority of the fans, and I touched on this in my last video as well, but we acknowledged what we needed to bring in during the trade period. We identified the targets that we were going to go after, and we actually locked all of them away. I think it was quite refreshing for the fans, to be honest, because year after year we're so used to being disappointed. We're linked to some big name players and players that really could make an impact for us on field, and we just never seem to be able to get the deal done. Most of the time they do end up staying with their original club, but a couple of times we have missed out, and that's okay. But after a while, that really does start to take its toll mentally, and you sort of sit there and you're thinking, oh my God, are we going to do this again? Is it going to all just fall to pieces? But luckily it didn't. Looking at those 3 headline names, Luke Parker, Jack Darling, Caleb Daniel, all 3 of those guys definitely will have an impact in some way on field and off the field as well. One thing I found really interesting, what Brady Rawlings said, and let's just dive straight into Luke Parker, is that deal was only done in the final 8 minutes or so apparently of the trade period, although Parks did come out after the grand final and request a trade to North, and we all sort of expected it to happen. But Brady did make a comment, and he said that he had spoken to Luke Parker earlier in the day on deadline day, and Parks said he was desperate to get across to the club, and he was pacing up and down for those couple of hours before the deadline hit, wondering if the deal would be done. I don't know about you guys, but I was always confident that would happen. I felt like it was a no-brainer. He feels like his time's up at Sydney. He's requested to come to North, and the seed was sort of planted quite a few weeks in advance. And I feel like in a scenario like that, it's really rare that it doesn't happen. And so for him to be so desperate to come to North, not only for that fresh start, but to sort of take on a challenge. I mean, he's in his early 30s now. He knows what it takes. He's been successful. He's just played in another grand final, albeit another losing grand final. But for him to sort of identify North and say, yep, this is something I can really work with, and this is sort of a new challenge despite being at the later end of his career, I think is a really positive sign for the club. Former captain, and he's an All-Australian, he's a premiership player, he's one of the last 2012 Swans on their list, and it's really nice and it's really refreshing to hear that someone who I still feel like has a lot to offer both on and off field to want to come to North has been a really, really pleasing thing. Luke Parker didn't come alone to North from the Swans. In the final hour, Jacob Constanti, the small forward who hasn't played a game yet, he's yet to make his AFL debut. He was sort of thrown in as a sweetener on top to come across to North. This is what Brady Rawlings had to say about Jacob.
Yeah, so Jacob's been at Sydney for 2 years. We've followed him closely for 3 to 4 years now. He's a Gippsland power boy originally. We rated him really highly in the draft in 2022. We actually thought we'd probably get him at one of our picks, but Sydney got him before us. So followed his career really closely. He's a pressure forward. His chase and tackle is outstanding for a 19-year-old player. Clearly as a footy team, we've needed some extra pressure up the forward line, and we think, with Jack Darling, leading West Coast inside 50 tackles this year, and what we think Jacob could potentially become as an inside 50 real pressure player, we think we've addressed a few needs there.
If I'm honest, I'm sort of in two minds about this one. Initially, you could sort of sit here and say, club really rate him, tick. He's 19 years of age and we kind of got him for nothing, so let's just give it a shot. All well and good. On the flip side, he hasn't been able to crack it into Sydney's team. He was out of contract at the end of the season, and it's likely that he would have been delisted if he hadn't got a second opportunity at North. Kind of got him for nothing. Happy to give him a shot, especially because that small forward position has been just incredibly underserviced for years. I mean, it feels like a very, very long time that we've had a quality small forward. And I'm not talking about a mid-sized forward like a Paul Curtis or a Cam Zerha or even an Eddie Ford. We know what these guys can do. But Jaden Stevenson hasn't really been able to successfully fill that role. Robert Hansen Jr. showed a little bit towards the end of this season, but for me, it's still not enough to prove that he would lock that position away long term. Phoenix Spicer, we've had Jack Marnie, Blake Drury. None of these guys have really done anything in that small forward role. I think there's a great opportunity here for Constanti. One thing I do like about what Brady said is that he's a pressure small forward, which I think is so important in a side that we've really struggled to retain the ball inside 50. Potentially his ability to bring the pressure as a small forward, and the fact that he's 19 years of age, and the fact that we have apparently been into him since before he was drafted, maybe the reason why we opted to bring him onto our list as opposed to Carlton's Matt Owies. Now, Matt Owies was linked to North very, very early on in the trade period. I think it was actually before the trade period even begun. He's 27 years of age. He's kicked 30 goals in Carlton's forward line. He's a talented player. I've watched him play, and I was really big on him coming over to North. However, one of the knocks on his game is that he doesn't have that defensive element like Constanti apparently does, and in a side that really struggles to retain the ball inside their forward 50, we struggle to get repeat entries. It's hard to see how Owies would really flourish at North, and I didn't really think about it until, again, having the opportunity to sit down and reflect, because when Owies was first linked North, I was all about it. I was like, get this guy at the club. I've watched Carlton really closely over the 2024 season. He's really talented. I'm really surprised that Carlton's shown him the door. That, for me, I was sort of like, okay, now it maybe makes a little bit more sense. The difference is that Owies is older, he's more experienced, and he has proven himself at a senior level, whereas Constanti is really taking a risk. But in my opinion, it's a low risk. It's not something that we currently have. In my opinion, he's not taking anyone's spot. I think he gets an opportunity. He comes straight into the 23. I'd play him straight away and just sort of throw him in the deep end and see what he's got. Clearly, he's been starved of opportunity down at the Swans, so let's just hope he can rise and deliver. I guess the reason why I am a little bit skeptical on this one is just knowing that he was out of contract at the end of the season and that he would probably be delisted if he didn't come over to North. It can be seen as a sweetener on the Luke Parker deal, and I actually do think he's got a great opportunity here to prove himself, and now is his time. I don't know if he'll get another opportunity elsewhere if he doesn't make it at North, so it's sort of now or never for him. And like I said before, and what Brady said, the club's clearly been into him for a while, so this could work in our favour. I just hope that it's not the case of Sydney just offloading their unwanted goods and it just takes up a list spot for us and he doesn't flourish. Moving on to Jack Darling, I loved Brady's comments about Jack Darling, and I actually think Jack Darling is the most underrated acquisition for North this off season. There's a lot of talk about Parker, and we know what a great player he is, and Caleb Daniel, he's still only 28 years old, and he'll have some benefits, not only in the role rebounding off halfback, but he'll be able to push someone like Colby McKercher further down the field. But I love the fact that we've been able to bring Jack Darling over to the club. It's been a really, really long time since we've had a second key tall forward to play alongside Larkey. We've had Calvin Coleman-Jones in that position. It hasn't worked. Brent Teakle, I think, has been good, and I think he's been serviceable, but I don't know if I see him in our long-term plans. Jack Darling, I understand, he is in his early 30s, and he obviously isn't part of our long-term plan either. However, given his experience and given the levels that we know he can reach, I think he is going to be able to A, teach Larkey so much, B, he's still an incredibly physically demanding presence, and it's so often that we see Larkey tag teamed by two defenders because we don't have anyone that's threatening or intimidating up forward to stand alongside him. So just given the sheer magnitude of Jack Darling, his frame, what we know he can do, it just sort of seems like it'll be a really, really great way to alleviate pressure off Larkey and allow Larkey to develop. It also allows Cam Zurhaar and Paul Curtis to have a little bit more freedom. Neither of them now are forced to play that really tall forward. I think Cam Zurhaar in particular. Cam Zurhaar, I think, is really, really interesting. I think a lot of people were underwhelmed by his output throughout this season, and he's signed a big 5-year deal now, and we know what he's capable of. We've probably signed him more on potential than what we actually saw throughout the season, but hopefully bringing in Darling just benefits the development of the players around him and the players who will be taking us to that 5th premiership. And I think it's so important to recognise the immediate impact, but also the medium and long-term impact that these players can have. So I really, really like the acquisition of Darling. I also really like what Brady said. Jack Darling's one of the best pressure forwards in the competition, which is quite remarkable. This season, he was the number 1 pressure forward for West Coast, and that is, again, a really, really important thing for us as a team who does struggle, like I said, to retain the ball inside forward 50. It rebounds way too quickly. We're unable to get re-entries. It just seems like it goes up the other end so quickly. So for us to be able to try and keep the ball in our attack more often and create more opportunities for ourselves, if that's his role and then others benefit from it, then I think it's a win-win situation. On the one end of the scale, you've got Parker and Darling. They've been brought in for their leadership. They've been brought in to drive standards and to really mentor the young guys as we start to push up the ladder. Then on the opposite end of the scale, you've got Constanti. He's only 19 years of age. He's relatively unproven, and he's just going to get an opportunity to play footy. Caleb Daniel probably sits in the middle. He's 28. He's been in the system for long enough now that he can guide the young players, and him being in the side will benefit the likes of Colby McKercher in particular, who can probably now start to push up the ground a little bit more. But then also he will play a role. Pick 25 is probably a high price to pay for a guy who has been in and out of the side this season. However, overall, his career suggests to me that he is a best 23 player. I think he definitely has a lot to offer us. Not only is he going to be able to help guys around him develop, McKercher being the one in particular, to alleviate him and unleash him further up the ground, but then also it probably is quality ball use for us off the back half. The only red flag for me bringing Daniel in is maybe it's our way of saying that Zach Fisher isn't up to it. While I enjoyed for the most part what Zach Fisher brought to the side, I also was underwhelmed at the same time. Can't question his effort, can't question his intent, but you can definitely at times question his possession. Not the cleanest user of the footy. And when you are responsible for being that playmaker and connecting the key defenders with the wingers and the midfielders, you really need to be a clean user of the footy. And Zach Fisher probably wasn't the cleanest ball user a lot of the time, and maybe did cost us throughout the season under pressure. So I understand that Caleb Daniel, pick 25 is probably a higher price to pay, but when you look at it holistically and everything we did in the trade period, I think it's okay because we probably got Parker for a little bit less. That's the only thing. That is the only negative, and it's got nothing to do with Caleb Daniel, but we've brought Zach Fisher in at the end of last year from Carlton. I think he signed a 4-year deal, and after one season, are we really looking at him and saying, maybe you're not up to it? It could also be a succession plan, for lack of a better word, for Luke McDonald. I think Luke McDonald still has a lot to offer, particularly from a leadership point of view, and particularly from a club culture point of view. I think that is so important. You need to have someone like that at the club who just loves the club and really embodies everything the club is about. And I think Luke McDonald does that better than just about any person at the club, player, coach, admin, anyone. But that's the only question mark and thing I would raise when talking about Caleb Daniel's recruitment.
We've welcomed now in the last couple of weeks 3 premiership players to the club. Do you sound out the current playing group about their thoughts on bringing in these experienced guys and kind of what they think about moves like that?
Yeah, the leaders in particular, I think they've probably identified too that we could do with some more experience. We've had Liam and Hugh retire to add to some other club greats who've had retire in previous years in Zeeble and Cunnington and Goldstein. So, to bring in some players that have been there, done that, to get 3 premiership players, and they've all got all Australians behind them as well, is great for our players to be able to see how they approach things and how they go about their training, and players that have been there, done that is invaluable for our playing group.
Of all the comments made by Brady in his sort of trade period recap, these were actually my favourite. Knowing how excited and how welcoming our current list was and how receptive they were to bringing these experienced players on board, the likes of Jai, the likes of Luke McDonald. He said Nick Larkey was, absolutely ecstatic. Being able to identify that there's still so much for this group to learn and that there's so much for this group to aspire to, I think is so important. It's great recognition, it's great self-awareness from the current playing group that, hey, we've got a lot of work to do and these guys know what it takes to be able to get us there. I said this in my last video, they might be a little bit older, they might be coming towards the end of their career, but the standards don't drop. The understanding and the acknowledgement of what it takes to make it at the top level, that doesn't leave you either. They know they can still drive standards. Their bodies might be a little bit slower, but mentally, I think they've still got plenty to offer, and that's why we've gone after these players. You've got to remember as well, none of these players, maybe the exception of Caleb Daniel, and I'm really, again, just talking about those core 3 premiership All-Australian players that we brought through. These players aren't here to play the role that they played in their prime. I don't think they're going to be taking up spots just for the sake of it. If the form's not there, I would hope that they would be treated like any other player and they'd be dropped. They're here for other reasons. It's here for mentorship, it's here for leadership, it's here for standards driving, and it's here to help the players around them develop because we've got the talent. So I think it's really, really important to remember we aren't bringing in these players to do what they were doing 5, 6, 7 years ago. The role that they have at North and what we're expecting from them next season and beyond is completely different to what they were expected to do at the clubs that they've come from. So that's where I'm going to leave Brady. I really, really liked his comments. I think he's filled, fans with a lot of optimism and hope for what's to come next season. Not only was Brady being able to talk the talk, but he also walked the walk. He was able to go out and get these deals done, and I know that he wasn't alone. There would have been a panel of people, including Alistair Clarkson, who would have identified the players that we wanted to bring in and make it happen. But still, I think this was overall a really successful trade period for the club, and I think internally, staff, players and fans alike, we're all really, really excited about the potential of this mix and this list and how it's going to take us forward. Unfortunately and unsurprisingly, not everyone was as thrilled as the internal people at North Melbourne with our trade period. The ever optimist, Damien Barrett, went on Footy Furnace on Wednesday night, and this is what he had to say about North's trade period.
North Melbourne have finally got some experienced players to come to them. Of course, Jack Darling, we mentioned Luke Parker, Costanti, the State-Nizer. What do you make of their trade period?
Look, I gave him a C, Jimmy. It could have been a B or B minus maybe. But look, I'm not totally sold on the Darling and Daniel acquisitions. I get why they get Parker more than those other two. And I mean, Daniel's not the 2020 Daniel who made an All-Australian and won a best and fairest. And I get he's a good quality person. He'll get a lot of footy down back. I get Darling is there for the Larkey protection. Parker will play a significant role. But I'm just not convinced it's going to work as a collective.
He says he gets it, but he clearly doesn't get it. Look, no disrespect to Damien Barrett. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but I think it's naive to not acknowledge where the club is at. And a lot of commentary, and it wasn't shown in that clip, but there has been some commentary following on from him. There's been commentary in the Herald Sun. They rated us a 3.5 out of 10 for our trade period. And the only thing that everyone's talking about is the fact that we missed out on Dan Houston. I really like what we did with Dan Houston. And I know that a lot of people are going to think that I'm insane by saying that. But let's be realistic here. How many hits and misses have we had over the last few seasons? Dusty, Isaac Heaney, Josh Kelly, Andrew Gaff. We weren't able to bring any of these guys in, and we've been in the same position for like the last 6 years now since we have started targeting these players. We've pretty much been down the bottom of the ladder for the whole time. It's no surprise to me that we did miss out on Dan Houston, but what I really liked is, despite the fact that it was becoming increasingly obvious day by day that he was going to go to either Collingwood or Carlton, we just hung in there. And I think the resilience of the club to remain in the conversation and to remain in the frame until the deal was absolutely done actually really impresses me. As a supporter, I want to know the club is doing absolutely everything they can to try and improve our ladder position. And if that means hanging around on the 1% chance that Dan Houston comes to North, then I'm all for it. I'm actually all for it. I think it shows resilience. I think it shows strength. I think it shows character. And I think it shows that we acknowledge where we're at and we know what we need to get better. Even though Dan Houston probably was the best available player and absolutely would have filled a need for North, A, we didn't sell the farm to bring him in. B, it's not like we did nothing. I would be more disappointed if Dan Houston was the only target that we had, couldn't make it happen, and then just went, okay, whatever, we'll just work with what we've got. We are constantly looking for ways to improve our list, and we know there's only so much of that can be done internally. We've got incredible kids coming through the ranks, and we've got quite a few, top 10 draft picks. So we need something to balance that out. All three of these guys made perfect sense. So it's disappointing that he can't, step out of it and have an overall view of what North were able to do. But I think internally, we've shown some really, really impressive signs. The last person I want to hear from is Kane Corns. He and Gary Lyon did a in-depth review of all 18 clubs and their trade period on SEN. This is what Kane Corns had to say, and I found it really, really interesting.
So I'm setting the benchmark high. I think they underperformed this year. I think about 8 wins next year is a pass score for North, and then the following year it's final. That's the reality.
Make no mistake, Wardlaw, McKercher and Sheasel. And I know Davey Gignac is your best player and those sorts of things, but those three will determine a lot of what happens. And
No doubt.
At the natural level of progression on the quality of those players, I think it's going to be exciting.
Players like Zerha and Larky, and like Dersmer is, it's going to be his second year. He's played a tough, but we've seen him sit on heads already. I mean, he's probably capable of kicking 25, 30 goals next year.
Yep.
So there's a lot of upside at North. I'd be excited, and the experience is going to help.
Kane Corns and Gary Lyon absolutely get it. They understand that while we've brought in these, senior players, they're not going to be the ones driving the ship. They're going to be the ones supporting our youth to push us forward and to move us up the ladder. A great summary of what North has been trying to do in this trade period and what they've executed. I also really like that Kane Corn said that North underperformed this season. I tend to agree, and I think if we had a couple more experienced players, then we would have won more games. There's 3 games I think that stands out in everyone's mind. Collingwood, we lost by a point. The D's, we lost by a couple of points as well. And then West Coast later in the year, had we had a Parker or had we had a Darling in there to be able to sort of calm the nerves and steady the ship, we probably would have won all 3 of those games. Kudos to them. I think they've absolutely hit the nail on the head with what North was trying to do in this trade period and now where the list should be able to go. Bringing in these key players doesn't mean they're going to be the ones driving the ship. They're actually not there to drive the ship. They're there to help the leaders that already exist within the club steer the ship and move us forward. They're there to support Jai Simpkin. They're there to support LDU, support Shees, support Wardlaw, Larky, Zerha. These are the players who are going to benefit. Jack Darling's not going to benefit by coming to North and playing at North. Luke Parker, and it's not in a bad way, but I'm saying the point is not for them to benefit. It's not like Dan Houston going to Collingwood at 27 years of age in a list that looks like it's primed to have another shot at a premiership. That's not where we are, and that's not how these players are going to benefit. Who knows? I mean, we might win the flag next year and then it's happy days for everyone. But right now, what we're looking to do with the players that we've brought in is exactly what someone like Kane Corns has said. These players are here to support the current leaders push North up the ladder. That's all from me. Now I want to hear from you. What did you think of our trade period? What did you think of the commentary that followed? Leave all of your thoughts in the comments down below. Make sure you like and subscribe as well for more Kanga content on tap. Let's continue that conversation across socials, Kanga TV show on X and on Instagram, and I will see you guys very, very soon.